If you would like to work directly with Dr. Kole to maximize your sleep quality with a comprehensive sleep coaching program, or if you're concerned that you have sleep apnea, or simply just want a second opinion consultation, she's now available to see patients in New Jersey, New York, California, and Georgia, with more states coming soon. Please visit oak.care/sleep for a complete list of telemedicine services with transparent pricing. You deserve rapid access to quality sleep care with a physician you can trust to have your back every step of the way on your journey to better sleep.
Hi, I'm Dr. Alison Kole, sleep medicine specialist and bona fide chronic insomniac. Welcome to the Sleep is My Waking Passion podcast. Remember, knowledge is empowerment, and if applied correctly, it can help you biohack your way to a better night of sleep, just like I did. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sleep is My Waking Passion podcast. I want to introduce a very new colleague to me, Liz Munoz. Welcome, Dr. Munoz. How are you today?
Thank you for being here. I'm doing well, thanks.
So Liz is one smarty pants. As you know, I really enjoy talking to smart people. And she was at the University of Pennsylvania for her training. She was at the University of Rochester, where my friend Mike Yurchison is at. He's a sleep specialist up there. I've interviewed him a couple of times. And Liz actually reached out to me. And when we were talking, I was so curious about her background as a family practitioner who had sort of transitioned to a focus on lifestyle medicine. And Liz has some really neat tips for how to manage stress. We know that stress is so interrelated with sleep and, it manifests as crappy sleep often when we have a lot of stress in our lives, and we need to figure out skills on how to manage that. So Liz, why don't you share with everyone? I sort of gave them the bare bones background. What do you want to share with folks?
I guess I'll just share a little bit. I'm board certified in family medicine, preventive medicine, and public health and lifestyle medicine. Today I'll be focusing a little bit more on lifestyle medicine, but it also kind of touches quite a bit on prevention as well. I currently practice mostly addiction medicine, actually. So I know a whole lot about addiction and mental health. And I have my own coaching practice that focuses on working with people around behavior change and trying to improve their health either by preventing, treating, or reversing chronic diseases. That's a little bit about me.
So basically, as you can see, your skill set is really, really vast. And guys, you're talking to someone who has a wide berth of experience and coming to medicine and coming to this conversation with an experience that's really different than mine. Mine was more of the pulmonary critical care, you have an issue, let me try to fix it. And then on the side, wanting so desperately to get into the idea of how do I help my patients kind of prevent disease through improving their sleep, which is just one facet, as we know. But you're sort of living that, which I became fascinated with after a more traditional trajectory, if you will. So welcome to the podcast. Why don't you share with everyone what exactly defines lifestyle medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. So lifestyle medicine is actually a fairly new specialty, but it focuses on the 6 pillars of health, which are nutrition, activity, restful sleep, social connections, avoidance of risky substances, and stress management. And it uses these 6 pillars to prevent, treat, or even reverse chronic diseases. We're not really going to touch on the chronic disease portion today, but is incredibly effective with things like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, as well as mood and anxiety disorders, inflammatory disorders, and it can even address cancers, so breast, prostate, and colorectal cancer.
Wow. May I ask maybe too simple a question, because obviously those are a number of chronic diseases and some of the most common ones that we have to deal with in sort of modern society, especially in the United States. But May I ask how exactly it does that? Is there something about the mind-body connection that somehow leads to some reversal of these conditions or better management of them?
Yeah, so it's kind of multifactorial, and I would very specific to each disease process. But in general, it's sort of addressing the whole picture of health, and really assisting people in learning how to make better choices that can impact their health. So they end up being able to lose weight easier, maintain a healthy weight, and really just lead healthier lives and more joyful lives a lot of the time.
So it sounds like it's really, if I'm thinking about it correctly, sort of as a really necessary adjunct to, yes, like you can't just decide you're not going to take your insulin or treat your diabetes or not take your blood pressure medication. That's not what this is about. But how do we do some of the other things and focus on them, which is often very limited when you just having that visit and you're like, listen, I got to talk about high blood pressure and your diabetes and your high cholesterol, and I have 20 issues and I've got 15 minutes and then I've got to move on to my next patient. A lot of those things sort of fall to the wayside. So having someone who really has that expertise and spends the time discussing that lifestyle portion of things is really a nice adjunct. Is that kind of fair to say? That's my impression from what I'm gathering from you.
I think I would just add, you have in primary care, you have about 7 minutes to kind of address everything that's being addressed.
I doubled the time.
Visit. No.
I was being generous.
I'm just putting that out there just because most people don't realize that really, we really have some pretty significant time limitations. So this counseling that often takes 30 minutes or a good hour to really go through with people, it's just not always feasible in primary care. You can do bits and pieces, but it's hard to hit all of it. But for people with the high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and diabetes, a lot of times you actually can outright reverse disease, and people can come off medications. So that is something that we are able to see. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That is really amazing. Yeah. I've had a few, and I would say I would highlight a few people who have really taken the lifestyle measures seriously. And when I've seen them in the office, even just, sometimes with weight loss, for example, that will essentially reverse their obstructive sleep apnea. So they may be able to even come off their machine for sleep apnea. And I do see patients who really take it seriously and their cholesterol markers are a lot better. And you're right, they come down on their blood pressure medications. Their blood sugars may stabilize. So there's just amazing things that happen when people really sort of marry the two, right? Marry the typical, okay, you have this condition, this is how we treat it, with the idea of digging deeper and seeing what we can do with our lifestyle to, take better care of ourselves, essentially. So I was really amazed. You had shared an article with me and I just loved it. Really focusing on stress management aspects of lifestyle medicine as just one pillar, not the whole thing. But even when you speak about it as pillars, right? That's just a construct because our brains like to be organized. We have this column, that column, the other column. But at the end of the day, you can cross-pollinate, you're managing your stress will impact your sleep and probably will have, reduce inflammation, potentially control your blood pressure a bit better. So it's all sort of interweaved and interrelated. Tell us about stress management and what your approach is and, what we should know about it.
Yeah, I guess I want to back up a little bit and just talk about stress in American society real quick, just because I think it's important to highlight. So there's a study in 2022, American Psychological Association. They do it every few years, Stress in America. And they found that more than 7 out of 10 Americans reported stress that impacted their health. And about a third of them noticed it was an impact on sleep. A third of them, it was more just they were noticing lots of worry. And about 15% reported increased alcohol, drug, and tobacco use. So I highlight that to say that, especially with COVID and kind of all the changes that we've seen over the last few years, stress is becoming more and more prevalent and more of an issue. And it impacts most Americans at this point. So I just want to highlight that before we get too far into this discussion.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing the statistics.
Yeah, of course. So, a little bit of stress can be good for us. It can help us perform, but a lot of stress, or stress over long periods of time, that tends to be where we see those like impacts on health. Um, so it's been specifically linked to sort of worsening cardiovascular disease, heart failure, asthma, psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, um, and mental health as well. So I just kind of wanted to give that background before we talk about stress tools to kind of have available to you. So with thinking about stress with lifestyle medicine, I'm kind of going to go through each of the six pillars and add in a seventh extra one that we can talk about too as well, which is time in nature, spending time in nature. But I'll just start with like the nutrition piece of it. Um, so American diets, are very high in saturated fats, they're high in refined sugars, they're very low in fiber. And that tends to really impact the bacteria in the gut, or the gut microbiome, which I'll talk about a little bit more. Um, Lifestyle medicine really promotes a whole food plant-based diet. And most people have not heard about that before, so I'll just kind of explain what it is. So whole food plant-based just means that you're trying to eat food in as close to its original form as possible. So a good example of that is like eating an apple off a tree versus applesauce versus an apple fritter, right? So the more we process food, the less nutrients it has, and the less fiber it has as well. And whole food plant-based diets consist primarily of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. So they don't typically include any sort of meat products, any fish, any dairy, any eggs. Um, that being said, I'm not necessarily promoting, the extreme of whole food plant-based diets for everyone, but every little bit goes a long way. So the whole food plant-based diet, it's very high in fiber. And that fiber serves as kind of the food for this gut microbiome, and it tends to keep it healthy. And as long as that microbiome, or just the range of bacteria, healthy bacteria in the gut, stays well, it promotes physical and mental health, and it's through a series of pathways through neuropeptides and neurohormonal pathways, basically, that impact like the hypothalamic pituitary axis in our bodies. So um, there's a lot of research around that, and it's probably way more complex than I'm kind of making it to be for today. But essentially, a good way to approach eating when you are in a state of stress is to try to eat as much whole food plant-based foods as you can to promote that very healthy gut microbiome.
May I ask a couple questions?
Yeah.
Okay, so I love this because it's come up more and more. It's more popular in social media to kind of discuss it. So, a couple of points. I do have questions, but I'm just going to make one point, which was suggested to me when I went for my first precision medicine appointment at Wild Health was, listen, yes, you need more fiber in your diet. Just be careful in how quickly you add that in. You want to add it in, but like if you go from like hardly have any fiber in my diet to I'm going to get the exact amount I need, your gut is going to revolt and you may get really constipated, and you got to kind of balance how much water you're having. So you may want to build that up. Would that be a fair statement? Yeah. Okay.
That is the very first statement. Yep.
So I love that. I think, what are they recommending these days? Is about 25 grams?
25 grams of fiber a day. Yeah.
All right. So 25 grams of fiber seems to be ideal, but just slowly build that up. I wanted to get your opinion on literally, it's like, I don't know, every other thing on my Facebook page. Maybe it's because, I'm sort of advertising who I am, or my Instagram, for example, or even TikTok. You're constantly seeing these videos about pre and probiotics and all of these things. So is it possible particularly if you're concerned about your gut health because you're experiencing GI issues, which again translate to oftentimes our GI tract is very sensitive to stress. I can tell you IBS for me was a real thing when I was very stressed out, and it was not pretty. It was running to the bathroom when I wasn't working and being constipated when I was. It was not a good sitch. Is there any utility to any of these supplements? Because you hear a lot of varying things. Some of it's like, well, it might be okay if it comes in a glass bottle and it's dark and you store it a certain way, and anything in a plastic bottle is crap. And then other folks, were saying you're really not getting what they say you're getting. And then, is it just that we want the quick fix, but in reality, we could accomplish the same goal just by switching our diet?
Right. So you can definitely get pre and probiotics through diet. It doesn't necessarily need to come from a supplement, which is, I think, not something we talk a lot about. I don't think there's a lot of harm necessarily to supplements, but I would definitely choose diet over supplements when given a choice. And I think, the biggest harm is really just cost. They're expensive to kind of continuously take over a period of time. I tend to generally just recommend it when people are on antibiotics, but otherwise I really talk to them about diet.
I love that because it's also saving, guys, you'll save cash. Like it's a matter of just eating those better foods. So if you think about, gee, I'm not going to take this probiotic that I have to spend $50 for the month on, and instead I'm going to go ahead and maybe I have to spend a scotch more money because I'm eating more fresh fruits and vegetables. I may need to go to the store a little bit more frequently, but it sort of offsets the cost of what you're doing with the supplement. Plus you're just feeding your body in a way that your gut naturally will be happier. So I don't think you can just, take a pill and go, okay, I'm just going to continue to eat like crap. I don't think those two things may go well together.
Yeah, a lot of high fiber.
How does it fit in?
Oh, sorry. I'm just saying a lot of high fiber foods tend to have those prebiotics in them. So, like I said, the more whole food plant-based you're eating, you're more likely getting those in your diet.
And I hear a lot about fermented foods. I'm half Korean, so kimchi is in my blood. Yeah. I love pickles. I love fermented foods. Mm-hmm. That may not be for everyone, but if you like sauerkraut, for example, same accomplishment, right? Yeah. Are there is it like sort of anything that's pickled that might be helpful, or is it, kimchi is this very special process? So
certain fermented foods, generally like high fiber foods, so fruits and vegetables tend to be sort of your highest bang for your buck foods.
Awesome. Okay. Take it away. What's next?
Yeah, so I wanted to touch briefly just on a study around, it looks like just like vegetarian diets and mood, to just kind of review that data a little bit with you. So this was a cross-sectional study. It looked like 138 Seventh-day Adventists, and they had them answer several questions, validated questionnaires around mood, as well as just like a food history questionnaire. And they were actually interested in looking at like vegetarians versus omnivores. So vegetarians don't eat fish, omnivores can eat fish. And fish contains certain nutrients, like fatty acids, basically, that are thought to be associated with like brain function. So their thought was, if they take away, the fish, will they see a change or a difference in mood? So the actual study results were different than what they anticipated. So vegetarian diets actually promoted improved mood. So that was just kind of a really interesting study that just sort of validates the whole idea that, the more whole food plant-based, the more fruits, vegetables, whole grains that you're eating, the more you're able to manage mood. So.
Out of curiosity, for folks that are really sort of like me, who really are focused on how do I maintain muscle mass over time? I think having as much muscle mass as you can, since it's more difficult to put on muscle as we get older, especially with hormonal changes in age, et cetera, protein becomes an issue. And one of the things we know is that folks that are really, depending on who you speak with, some people are even advocating. I know there's a lot of debate right now about what's the optimal amount of protein, but folks that are into sort of the fitness, bodybuilder, or even just lifter communities really emphasize, it could be up to, a gram of protein per pound of body weight. So you could be looking at like at least 120 grams, if not more, depending. So that can be a little challenging to get. And so they often emphasize things like animal proteins. And so I have always been curious about what are the best sources of plant-based protein, and also how you feel about some of the protein substitutes that are out there, because I almost question if it's better to go with an animal protein if you're craving a burger rather than something that might be fairly highly processed. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, plant-based diets tend to actually have a lot of protein in them. Legumes is primarily a lot of times where we're getting them. So soybeans, lentils, black beans, different types of beans, basically. Tofu, tempeh, those are pretty high in protein. Quinoa, actually, which is a grain, actually has a ton of protein in it as well. So I do think that there are ways to get definitely an adequate amount of protein through a plant-based diet. I am totally blanking on the name right now, but there is a great documentary about athletes who are plant-based, and it just kind of highlighting how these athletes have like amazing performance despite eating a plant-based diet. Because, traditionally you think about if you're an athlete, you want to eat more animal-based proteins, but that's really not the case. If I think of it, I will let you know, but right now it's kind of escaping me.
I love that. Any thoughts on the, like things like I don't want to call out any particular brands because there's a bunch of them. So I will keep mum about any brand so as to not insult anyone. But some of the meat substitutes out there, some of them I feel like can be pretty processed. And I just question, is that really where we should be going? Is it better to go 100% quote plant-based and eat more processed food as opposed to just say, well, I just need a piece of red meat today and I'm just going to have my piece of red meat?
Right. So I'm just going to repeat what I said a little bit earlier. It's just that the more plant-based you eat, whether or not you go fully plant-based, makes a huge difference as far as your health goes. I agree with you that there's a lot of plant-based products out there that are very processed, like some of the, Beyond Meat and those kinds of burgers they're soybean based, but they tend to have almost like 50% saturated fat in them. So, from what I've read, I think most experts say that it's better than an animal-based protein, but it's still not something you want to eat every day. So really, just kind of sticking to more of the fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes tends to give you like a better outcome than trying to, eating some of the more processed sort of vegan junk food type products.
Wow. Do you yourself adhere to a plant-based diet?
I do. Yeah.
Wow. I'm in admiration of you. I have definitely cut back a lot on animal protein, but I don't know that I could go full plant. I just don't know that that's going to be for me. I think part of my issue is that I need to get more creative with how I make legumes and incorporate those into my diet. Because at the end of the day, I think I'm just like not a huge bean person. I think that's one of the issues for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people get nervous with beans just because you associate them with like gas, basically, or bloating, and that makes people kind of feel uncomfortable. But it's funny. I read this article on it was the nutritionfacts.org from Dr. Greger, and he was talking about basically like starting to eat more beans and sort of measuring gas over time. And essentially, first 2 weeks is kind of the worst, and as you continue to have the same consumption, it slows down over time. So I know that tends to get people a little bit nervous sometimes about trying legumes.
Awesome. So we talked a lot about nutrition, and I'm fascinated by the connection between what we eat and stress and how those things are in the gut microbiome. Anything else you want to talk about related to stress management? This is a really cool discussion. We're going down a very different rabbit hole than I did with Nishi Bhopal, who's a psychiatrist in her micro practices. So this is really neat. I appreciate this.
Yeah, no problem. I remember the name of that documentary. It's The Game Changers, if anyone wants to check it out, the plant-based eating with athletes.
Oh, game changer. I'm writing that down. I want to see
Yeah, the
it.
Game Changers. It was on Netflix. I don't know if it is anymore.
Cool.
But I think the next pillar I had is activity.
What's that?
Activity.
Activity. Okay.
Yeah. So I think, physical activity, nutrition, all of that stuff is actually really hard to do when we're stressed. So I think sometimes it helps to understand why it's good to do it. It kind of helps kind of push us a little bit more towards maybe doing a little bit more of it when we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. But activity is kind of unique in that it has the ability to kind of take your body from this like fight or flight mode where your heart is beating really fast and your blood pressure is high and um, down back to sort of your homeostasis. So there, there've been a lot of different recommendations around activity, but I think the most recent ones are recommending at least 30 minutes of aerobic activity a day, moderate to high intensity, and then a couple of days of just strength training with weights, or however else you want to do it. But most people do not get this amount of activity, and it's both good for physical and mental health. So I wanted to look at a study together. It basically was just like a meta-analysis, kind of looking at different studies that looked at the effect of acute exercise on blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And 15 studies were kind of included in their criteria. 10 of those studies showed a significant impact between acute exercise and lowering blood pressure. And the minimum amount of exercise that was effective in doing this was about 30 minutes of moderate exercise. Um, so blood pressure being a good marker for sympathetic activity, right? And stress. I think activity is just one of those things that you just have to kind of get started. It helps to have a friend with you or a buddy to do exercise. And I really just tell people like you have to find what works for you, right? Activity is so personal. For some people, walking every day works really well. For others, biking. I'm more of a biker myself. But things like yoga, even just like dancing at home, it does not matter exactly what it is as long as you're getting your heart rate up and you're sweating and they typically for moderate activity they say if you're not able to sing but you can still talk. That's a good sort of measure of like you're in that moderate activity range. So I'll just kind of pause there. Any questions or
So I love what you're saying, right? Because activity really ties in as well to your quality of sleep. So we know if you're stressed all day for a variety of reasons, oftentimes it's job related, but it could just be psychosocial stressors, meaning other stuff that's just going on in your life. Stress really, when you think about it, it's exhausting to be stressed all the time because your body is constantly in this state of like hyper arousal, hyper vigilance, like you're just paying attention to everything going on. You're like, what's the next, where's the saber-toothed tiger coming from? My imaginary saber-toothed tiger that's making me nuts. And exercise kind of breaks that cycle. I think if I wanted to interject anything, it would be my experience when I was rounding in the ICU during, the pandemic was really I had lost the ability to really kind of put down some of that stress in a healthy way. And my coping mechanism just from being a busy practitioner outside of a pandemic was exercise. And that was the one thing I could will myself to do that. Even if I had maybe not as much sleep as it was ideal or something else was going on, I could will myself to do that. And then it just released the endorphins enough for me to be like, okay, I can do this and I can get through my day. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it was the additional stress and all the unknown variables sort of superimposed on already what is, a difficult kind of work situation to begin with, I really just could not manage the exercise component. And it's a long-winded way of saying, though, I have to confess that I think I judged myself a little bit. I had been a person who did CrossFit, and then I really prided myself on the fact that after 2 babies, I was able to lift more than I did when I was a CrossFitter, even though my exercise looked different. And I had accomplished all these things, and I worked with my trainer, and I was like, yeah, I'm strong. And then all of a sudden I was like going to just keep my regular routine. And I was trying so hard to do that. But it was like, I was like, it felt like within a week, the gas was so depleted that, my lifting really suffered. I was like, I don't know, I barely feel like I can lift anything right now, let alone kind of do what I did before. And I had sort of a negative response to that, meaning I was like, oh, Alison, you should be able to handle that. Like, shame on you. So don't place blame on yourself or see yourself in a negative light because of that. That would just be, especially if you're someone who tends to be like, I accomplished this and I run my schedule and I'm, I have this life that's mapped out for me because I have a type A personality. I do. Just being kind to yourself during a stressful period, I think can be helpful. My only other addition as well, because I just learned about this again for my precision medicine appointment, which I thought was super neat, was that if you have limited time in your day, sometimes my husband will be like, hey, let's go for a walk. And there's several times a week when he's in town that we love to do that. And yeah, if I do that, I really am not going to have enough time to put in a full weightlifting sesh and then also be able to get through my day with the other activities that I need to accomplish. So what was suggested is, hey, why don't you start introducing something like rucking? So now you're having some weight on your back, and obviously you don't want to hunch over or keep yourself in an unoptimal position, which means you've got to use your belly muscles. You are going to be working your legs. You're working on some of those stabilizers. So it's like almost like turning it into functional fitness. So you start with a walk, but then you make it really a walk with like weights. So you're sort of combining the two. I think that's a really clever way that I've really enjoyed getting into, just as like an accessory activity, because that way it's almost like, well, I'm not really missing weights because I'm going out on this glorious walk and I'm enjoying it so much. So it doesn't feel like it's in competition with some of the other goals I have in mind, is my point. So you can find clever ways that work for you. To your point, you love biking. I do like Peloton. For me, Peloton, I don't want to go on the sidewalk because I'm really afraid I'm going to get run over. Everybody's biking around here. And I'm like, I feel like it's so risque, just in terms of a perspective of, Jersey is super busy and populated, and these roads are pretty narrow and winding. So kudos to you if you are brave enough to get out there. I am not. But yeah, I think that's what I would add to the discussion. I think what you're saying is spot on, right? So if you are going to be physically active, it helps to kind of decompress all the stress of the day from whatever is going on. And it also, because you're further depleting all those ATP molecules, all those energy molecules you've created, you sort of allow your body to be physically tired too. And it's just a way to help you engage with sleep in a way where you're just like, I'm tired. You really exhaust yourself. There's actually nothing wrong with that. It means you've had a very productive and active day, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. I think my thing I was just thinking about is, as with nutrition, even a little bit goes a long way. They've had studies that even just 10 minutes of exercise a day makes a difference. So if that's all you can muster that day, that's totally fine.
And also too, like, build up, right? So nobody's expecting you to be like, oh, I'm going to hurt myself on the first day I try to exercise because I've done nothing, right? So even things like start to manage, how many steps do I get at baseline? How do I increase that? Maybe you can start to measure, because the smart watches nowadays and everything, there's all sorts of ways to kind of track your movement or get a rough gauge of what you're doing. And sometimes that's also a marker if you had a really busy day where you go, oh, I really haven't been that active today. Maybe I should go for that walk because I should be working on increasing my steps. Mm-hmm. So I think it can build in a little bit of accountability when sometimes we can let our days get ahead of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of times what I tell my folks who have never exercised but don't have any like reasons not to exercise, right? So you have to make sure that you're cleared if you're kind of starting from nothing and you have some other health conditions like heart disease, diabetes, things like that. A lot of times I'll tell them, what can you do right now? We'll kind of start there, and they'll say, oh, I can walk around the block. And I'm like, I just say, great. So why don't we start with, how many times a week do you think would work for you? So, 2 to 3 times a week. So we'll usually start with, and then you can sort of add 5 minutes every week, every couple of weeks, however it works for them up until they reach sort of that goal of 30 minutes a day. So that's sort of like a gradual way to do it that people can sort of personalize what works for them.
Oh, that's a great suggestion. Just gives you a way to be accountable, but also have a game plan, right? That's one of the hardest parts is like, what are you going to do? Okay, I showed up at the gym. Now what do I do? Right?
Yeah.
Especially for weights and stuff. And there's like programs out there, apps, little cool things that might be helpful in guiding you as to what exercises you can do. If you do decide you're going to finally drive to the gym and you got your workout gear on and then you go and it feels very intimidating because there's like 50 machines and you're like, oh crap, what do I do? Stick with the basics. Maybe start with some barbell stuff, get on the treadmill, whatever you can do to get yourself to just feel at ease, create a new habit, right? A new healthy habit. I love that.
Exactly. Yeah. So lifestyle medicine focuses a lot on prescriptions. So we do nutrition prescriptions and exercise prescriptions, kind of just using SMART goals. So specific, measurable, achievable, time bound, and realistic. So an example of that would be I'm going to walk around the block 2 to 3 times a week for however many minutes on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday for the next 2 weeks. And that way you can sort of have something to be accountable to, but the goals are actually made by the patient, not by me. My goal is or my role is really to just sort of be their guide and help them figure out where, or give them some choices. But really, it's kind of the patient really making the goals, and that way they feel more accountable.
Is so important. That's a huge point because it's about taking ownership of the change that you want to have. I could sit here and I could tell you, oh, you should do this, you should do that, but you need to be motivated to do it yourself as well. So we're here to help you achieve that motivation. Liz, I think that's just a fantastic point because it really gets to the concept of mindset, like making a real commitment to shift to a healthy lifestyle. I have not heard you once talk about the word DIET, diet, because it's not just you're going to do this for a short period of time and then you go back to where you're at before. It's about that whole lifestyle change. Now, I know we're sort of starting to run out of time. So I know we can't get through all the pillars, but I was dying to hear about your additional pillar because you mentioned it and I don't want to leave here without talking about it. So maybe we can skip because I think we can skip. It's a huge one and obviously not included in the mainstream.
Yeah, so time in nature, it's kind of interesting. It's been, so it's not an official pillar currently, but it's kind of been proposed as the seventh pillar. It is, we're seeing more and more evidence of its impact on both physical and mental health. Specifically, there was like a recent study, it was a meta-analysis. It looked at 32 different studies, about 2,000 participants, and it looked at the exposure to nature and its impact on positive affect and negative affect. So really just kind of looking at mood. The results essentially show that the time in nature had a direct increase, like a moderate effect increase on positive affect, and a smaller but still significant decrease in negative affect. And it's kind of interesting. So we live in like such a crazy society. Like we're super busy and we're always like using screens and having to manage like all of this information all the time. And it's exhausting, right? Like it causes like mental strain. And the idea behind sort of the time in nature being this like just rejuvenating thing for us is that it kind of alleviates that mental strain because our brain in its interaction with nature is so effortless and doesn't require all of these like balancing of a million different things all the time. So it's sort of that idea of decreased mental strain that they feel like maybe kind of mediating the effect of time in nature.
And, for me, I could say I love that. I love everything you're saying because I have always kind of joked. I'm like, oh, I'm not an outside girl. Really what it is I don't like bugs. So I'm biased because when I lived in Los Angeles for so many years, I'm like, oh, great. I could be outside, which I spent plenty of time outside, but I don't have bugs here. You come back to New Jersey and it's like, great. Now I have 400 mosquito bites. But just kind of, I think once you start exercising outside, like especially taking that walk, maybe for me, it kind of gets to one of your other pillars, which is social interaction. Like that's a time that I have made very special because my significant other wants to go with me, and then this is where we could like spend some alone time together because it's really hard to get out for date nights when you have kids and responsibilities and after school activities and all of that. So it's our little way of being like, all right, we both have stressful lives. We can decompress and then we can have that kind of time together. But you're right in that, there's something to be said for just going for a walk when you're just having that crazy day and you're like, you know what? I don't know that I can deal with anyone. Like I've maxed out. Let me just peace out for, like you said, just going for that 10-minute walk. Let me just decompress for a little bit. Let me settle. Let me get the amygdala to stop firing. Such wise, but it seems so basic, but they're really wise words because a lot of cultures really do embrace the outdoors, I feel like. Mm-hmm. I just think it's not as popular in American culture, unfortunately. To really, us living in the concrete jungle. Maybe I'm also biased because I've lived in major cities, LA, New York, Boston, and Jersey I live in a really nice area in Jersey now where there are trees and everything. But I can tell you as a kid, did not appreciate it. I'm like, I live in the boonies. I don't know what's going on. And meanwhile, I'm like, New Jersey's super heavy populated. So it's actually like, I'm just excited that my town embraces trees because there's other parts of Jersey where it feels like there's nothing but buildings and hardly any foliage.
I hear you. So sometimes like when thinking about time in nature, people talk about blue zones and green zones. I don't know if you've kind of read about that, but
what are blue zones and green zones?
So blue zones are like just areas that contain water. So like the ocean, lakes, rivers, things like that. Whereas green zones are more, like forests. So just areas with lots of trees, typically, or vegetation. And both of them are absolutely, have the same impacts of sort of decreasing that mental strain. But some people, have a preference for blue zones. Other people have a preference for green zones. I like a little both. But it's kind of a fun way to think about it too.
Oh, that's so great. Yeah, I mean, you can go for hikes. There's some places in LA that are really kind of neat where you can go for cool hikes, and then you can go for hikes in Jersey. I have been on hikes in Jersey, and the wooded area is really nice. I think my kids are a little too little right now, so I'd opt for a paved path, but it can look different to different people, and what you like can evolve over time. And we all love the beach. I mean, there's some beautiful places down the Jersey Shore, Cape May being my favorite of all of them. And there's nothing like a cliche long walk on the beach to just, you hear the ocean and it's the fresh air, and it really kind of helps open your mind, expand your. Yeah, I think it's a mindful expansion exercise. At least it is for me, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Liz, anything else that you'd like to share? Because there are we could go on and on. Like this could be a 2-hour podcast, but I can't make it a 2-hour podcast. So the bottom line is that there are a number of pillars. We've merely touched on two of them, but I think it was such a worthwhile discussion that I feel like we got a lot out of it. We emphasized what you can do with exercise, we emphasized what you can do with nutrition, and we emphasized what hopefully will be a future pillar, which is spending time in nature. So this has been such a fun discussion, Liz. I really, really appreciate your time. I can't wait for this to air. This is going to be super cool. And you're really bringing a completely different perspective. So I've talked about stress now in two different ways with two different brilliant minds. This is so much fun. I'm so glad I get to do this just cause. So hopefully other people will want to listen to it and learn from it as well. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciated being here. And if you ever want me to come back and talk more about pillars, I can do that.
Oh, heck yeah. If you are enjoying this podcast, if you feel that you are growing, you're more knowledgeable, you're feeling empowered about your sleep, that is the purpose. So please, please take the time to like and review the podcast, share it amongst your friends and family. Please follow me. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram or Facebook, I am there as well. My handle on Instagram and TikTok is AskTheSleepMD. And you can also go to my website, AskTheSleepMD.com, for more information about each of these episodes. We will be sharing with you cited articles that you can actually refer to and read yourself if you like, and lots of juicy tidbits about how to sleep better. Thank you. This podcast would not be possible without the support of Mr. Joey Salvia, who is my producer, and Adrian Pederath, my creative director. Disclaimer. The statements made on this podcast have not been evaluated by the U.S. Food or Drug Administration. They are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. The information provided by this podcast should not be used as individual medical advice. While I am a practicing sleep provider, I am not your sleep provider. You should always consult with your personal healthcare provider for individual recommendations and treatment.